I was 17 the night I learned that a name, however grand, cannot open a door that the law has decided to keep shut. I say I learned it, but that is not quite honest. I watched a man teach it to another man, and I stood close enough to feel the lesson land, and afterward I carried it the way you carry a coin you found on the road, not something you earned exactly, but something you would never spend and never lose. My name is Corwin. In those days I was the youngest watchman posted to the Warden's gate at Harrogate Keep, which is a polite way of saying I was the boy who carried the ledger and lit the lamps, and stayed out of the way of men who knew what they were doing. The man who did the teaching was Sergeant Aldous Fenn, of the old Ravenmore line, and the man who needed teaching was Lord Cassius, who was the son of the Queen Consort and who had never in his life been told no by anyone who mattered. Let me set the door for you first, because the door is the whole story. The Warden's gate is not the front of the keep. Anyone can gape at the front of the keep, the great bronze doors, the forecourt where the ceremonial guard changes at noon, and the tourists press their faces to the iron and the trumpet's sound. That is theater, and theater is meant to be seen. The Warden's gate is the opposite of theater. It sits at the back of the east wing, down a colonnade that most of the court has never walked, and it opens onto nothing that glitters. Behind it lie the record halls, the vaults where the realm keeps its charters and its wills and its seals, and the long dry ledgers that decide who owns what and who inherited what and which claim over which acre of Eldermore is lawful, and which is a lie a clever man told convincingly. Behind the Warden's gate is where the truth of the kingdom is written down and locked away, and a kingdom that cannot trust its own records is a kingdom that will eat itself within a generation. So the Warden's gate is guarded not the way a treasure is guarded, but the way a memory is guarded. Nothing crosses it that is not written in the day book. No one crosses it whose name is not on the standing list, and the standing list is not decided by rank. That is the thing the whole court forgot, and the thing Lord Cassius had never been made to understand. The list is decided by the Warden of the Rolls, under a charter older than the reigning house, and the Warden answers to the law and not to any living person's temper. Sergeant Fenn held that gate the way a good hinge holds a door. You did not notice him until you tried to move him, and then you discovered he was the reason the whole thing had a shape. I had been under him for 4 months on the night it happened, and in 4 months I do not think I had heard him raise his voice once. He was not a large man, though he was tall, and he was not young, though he was not old. He had a face that had decided long ago to give nothing away for free, and gray coming in at his temples under the black of the bearskin, and hands that were always exactly still. The other watchman told me he had served on the northern marches before he came to the keep, in years when the marches were not the quiet farm country they are now, and that there were things in his record they were not allowed to read but had heard about. I never asked him. You did not ask Sergeant Fenn about himself. You asked him what the standing order was, and he told you, and then you did it, and the world stayed in its lines. The standing order at the Warden's gate was 3 sentences long. He made me recite it my first night. Every soul who crosses is named in the day book with the hour and the leave that admits them. No soul crosses on a name alone. The name must sit on the Warden's list or carry the Warden's written token. And this was the 3rd sentence, and he said it slowest. The guard at this gate takes his authority from the charter of the rolls and not from the person in front of him, however high, and a guard who forgets that has already failed, whether or not anything bad has happened yet. However high, I remember saying, because I was 17 and I wanted to sound like I understood the size of the words. Even a lord. Especially a lord, Sergeant Fenn said. A stranger who is turned away goes off to complain to someone who cannot help him. A lord who is turned away goes off to complain to the king. That is the difference between them. It is the only difference that matters at this gate. I did not understand then how exactly he had named the thing that was coming. I understand it now. The night began ordinary, which is how the nights that matter always begin. It was the tale of autumn, the cold that has not yet decided to be winter, and the colonnade lamps burned in their iron cages and threw long bars of light and shadow across the stone. I had done my rounds of the lamps and entered them in the book. Sergeant Fenn stood his post at the gate itself, under the arch, in the exact place a man stands when he intends to be a wall. There were 2 other watchmen with us that night. Old Breger, who had held gates for 30 years and had a cough he blamed on the marsh air, and a steady young fellow named Pell who was 2 years my senior and let me know it. 4 of us, and the gate, and the record halls dark and locked behind, and the court somewhere off through the east wing living its bright loud life that we could hear only as a distant hum. The warden of the rolls that season was a careful old woman named Mistress Ilda, who had held the charter for longer than I had been alive, and who slept in a chamber off the record halls, so that she was never far from the thing she kept. She had gone to her rest early that night. Before she went she had done a thing I did not think much of at the time, though I think of it often now. She had come to the gate herself, in her plain gray gown with the ring of the rolls on its chain around her neck, and she had spoken quietly with Sergeant Fenn for a few minutes, and I had caught only the end of it. "No one," she had said. "Not tonight. The Isolde inventory is out on the tables and the seals are broken while I check them against the charters, and I will not have a soul in that room until every seal is set again. You understand me, Sergeant? No one. If the king himself asks, wake me and I will tell him no to his face, and he will thank me for it in the morning." "No one, mistress," Sergeant Fenn had said. "It is written." And it was written. He had entered it in the day book in front of me. "By order of the Warden of the Rolls, the record halls are closed to all persons this night. No leave granted. No exception." He had drawn the line under it the way he drew a line under everything, straight and final, and Mistress Ilda had gone off to her rest, and the gate had settled into the long quiet of the small hours, and I had thought the night would be nothing but lamps and the ledger and Breger's cough. I should tell you what the Isolde inventory was, because it is the powder under everything that happened. The late Queen Isolde had been the king's first wife, and beloved, and dead some years by then, and she had left behind her a private estate, jewels and plate and horses, and a hall full of things that had been hers and hers alone, held in her own right and not the crown's. When a person dies with an estate held in their own right, the law does not simply let the survivors carve it up by appetite. The law says the estate is inventoried, item by item, and the inventory is checked against the deceased's own charters and wills, and only what the charters allow may pass, and to whom the charters say and no other. It is dry work. It is the driest work in the kingdom. It is also the only thing standing between an heir and a thief, because a thief with a good story and a high enough friend can make a great deal of a dead woman's property vanish into gifts and understandings if no one is checking the seals. Mistress Ilda was checking the seals. That was why the inventory was out on her tables with the wax broken, and that was why the record halls were closed, and that was why, though I did not know it yet, a certain lord was awake at an hour when honest business is asleep, coming down a colonnade he had no leave to walk, with a want in him that would not take no for an answer. We heard him before we saw him. You always hear the entitled ones first. They do not know how to move quietly through a place, because quiet is a thing you learn when you have ever had to be careful, and Lord Cassius had never once in his life had to be careful. There were boots on the stone, more than one pair, and a voice pitched to carry, laughing at something, and then the swing and knock of the colonnade's outer door, and then the lamps caught them. Lord Cassius came down the colonnade like a man coming into a room he owned. He was perhaps 30, and handsome in the way that is mostly good tailoring and good sleep, and he wore a coat the color of wine with silver at the collar, and a signet on his hand that he had a habit of turning with his thumb, around and around, when he was thinking about how important he was. Behind him came 2 others, a lean, sharp-faced man I would later learn was his steward, a fellow named Osric who did his lord's remembering and his lord's excusing, and a big slow servant carrying a lamp of his own and a leather case under his arm. The case, I would learn, mattered. Everything about that case mattered. But at the moment, all I saw was 3 men where the standing order said there should be none. And I felt my stomach drop the way it does when the ordinary night turns and you know, without being told, that you are about to watch something you will remember. Sergeant Finn did not move. That is the first thing to understand about that whole night. The number of times Sergeant Finn did not move, and how each stillness was a decision and not an absence. He stood under the arch with his rifle at his shoulder and his eyes forward and his hands still. And he let Lord Cassius come to him, because it is the man who is out of place who must close the distance, not the man who is where he belongs. "Ah," Lord Cassius said, arriving, looking Sergeant Finn up and down with the pleasant contempt of a man appraising a horse. "Good. There's a man on. Open it up, there's a good fellow. I'll only be a few minutes." Sergeant Finn said, "The record halls are closed tonight, my lord, by order of the Warden of the Rolls. No leave is granted to any person." He said it evenly, without heat, the way you would tell a traveler that the bridge is out. And I watched Lord Cassius receive it, and I watched the receiving take a moment, because the words had entered his ears but they had not yet reached the part of him that expected the world to arrange itself around his wants. When they reached it, his face did an interesting thing. It did not get angry. Not yet. It got amused, in the way a man is amused when a child says something that is charmingly, hopelessly wrong. "Closed," he repeated. "Yes, to persons. I'm not persons, Sergeant, I'm Lord Cassius. Do you know who I am?" "I know your name, my lord," Sergeant Finn said. "It is not on the warden's list tonight. No name is. The halls are closed to all." "You misunderstand me." Lord Cassius turned the signet on his hand, around and around. "I'm not asking whether my name is on some clerk's list. I'm telling you my name. My mother is the queen consort. I dine at the king's own table. Do you imagine the little arrangements of a records clerk apply to me? Come, open the door. I've business inside and I've no wish to stand about in a drafty hall arguing with the help." I have thought a great deal in the years since about that word help. He said it so easily. He did not even mean it as an insult, which was the worst of it. He meant it as a description. To Lord Cassius, the 4 of us at that gate were furniture that happened to breathe, and the notion that furniture might have a will, an oath, a charter of its own that outranked his want, it had simply never occurred to him. That was his whole undoing in the end. Not cruelty. Cruelty he might have recovered from. It was that he could not imagine that anyone below his rank was real. Sergeant Finn let a silence sit. He was good at silence. He used it the way a mason uses a level to let a thing settle and show whether it was true. Then he said, "My lord, I will tell you plainly so there is no misunderstanding between us. I do not open this gate on a name. I do not open it on your mother's name or the king's name or my own. I open it on the leave of the Warden of the Rolls written in this book. Tonight there is no leave. Tonight the answer is no. And it will be no for the queen consort, and it will be no for the king, because the king himself set the charter of the rolls above the temper of any living man, his own included. That is not my opinion. That is the law you dine under at his table. I am sorry to keep you from your business. The business will keep until morning." You could have heard a moth's wing in that colonnade. Breger had stopped coughing. Pell had gone very straight. I had forgotten, I think, to breathe. And Lord Cassius stood there in his wine-red coat with the silver at the collar, and for one moment, one honest moment, I saw something cross his face that I did not expect, which was uncertainty. He had come down that colonnade certain that his name was a key, and the name had turned in the lock and the lock had not moved, and for a heartbeat he did not know what to do with a world in which that was possible. Then he decided to be angry instead. It is always easier to be angry than to be uncertain, and Lord Cassius had never once chosen the harder of two things. "You forget yourself," he said, and now the pleasantness was gone and the voice had an edge on it. "You forget yourself entirely. I could have you off this post with a word. One word to my mother and you'll be counting sheep on the northern marches by the new moon, you and your straight little line in your little book. Is that what you want? To end your career over a door? Over a room full of dusty paper that means nothing to anyone but clerks? It means nothing to me either, my lord, Sergeant Finn said, and I heard, for the first time, the smallest weight come into his voice, not anger, but a kind of iron patience, the sound of a man who has decided exactly how far he will bend, which is not at all. What is inside the room is not my business. Whether it is treasure or paper or dust is not my business. My business is the gate. My orders are the warden's orders. And you may go to my mother's name, and you may go to the northern marches yourself if it pleases you, but you will not go through this gate tonight, because I have not been given leave to let you, and I do not open doors I have not been given leave to open. That is the whole of it. That is the man I am. If it costs me the post was never worth keeping on the other terms. I want you to sit with what he said, the way I have sat with it. If it costs me the post was never worth keeping on the other terms. He said it plainly, without drama, the way he said everything, and it took me years to understand that in that one sentence he had put his whole life on the table and pushed it toward the man in the wine-red coat and said, "Here, if you can take it, because I would rather lose it than lie." There is a kind of courage that shouts and swings, and there is a kind that stands very still and lets you see that it cannot be bought, and I have come to think the second kind is the rarer and the harder, because the first is done in a hot minute, and the second must be done in the cold, over and over, every time the price is named. Lord Cassius did not understand it. How could he? He had spent his life among people who could always be bought by a title, by a fear, by a favor, by a smile. A man who could not be bought was, to him, not a brave man but a broken tool, a thing that had stopped working the way things were supposed to work. And a broken tool you do not reason with. You force it, or you throw it out, and Lord Cassius, being what he was, decided to try both. "Very well," he said, and his voice had gone smooth and cold in a way that was worse than the shouting. "Have it your way, Sergeant. We'll see how the law smiles on a man who kept a lord of the realm standing in a corridor at midnight." He turned to the sharp-faced steward. "Osric, the case." And the big slow servant stepped forward with the leather case, and Osric took it, and I watched Sergeant Finn's still eyes go to that case and stay there, and I understood, without knowing anything yet, that the case was the true reason for the whole visit, and that the argument about the name had only ever been the door Lord Cassius had tried first. Now he was going to try a different door. And Sergeant Finn, who had spent a life reading the difference between a man who wants to pass and a man who wants something carried, was already 3 steps ahead of him in the dark. The steward Osric came forward with the case held before him like an offering, and the lamplight ran along its brass corners, and I saw that it was a fine case, a lord's case, the kind of thing that is made to hold papers a man does not want crushed. Osric had a way of moving that was all soft edges and small bows, a man who had made a life out of being the smooth surface his master's roughness slid across. He set the case on the wide stone ledge at the side of the arch, where the day-book sat, and he opened it with the little brass catches, and inside were papers, a whole sheaf of them, cream-colored, heavy, with the shine of good vellum and the weight of seals. "Sergeant," Osric said, in a voice like warm oil, "I fear my lord and I have got off on the wrong foot with you, and that is my fault, for I should have led with this and spared us all the unpleasantness. My lord is not some idle visitor come to gawk at the vaults. He comes on the warden's own authority. Here." He drew out one of the cream-colored sheets and turned it so that the seal caught the light. "The warden's token, written leave. You'll see it's all in order, the seal of the rolls, the date, my lord's name entered as bearer. You said yourself you opened the gate on the warden's leave. Well, here is the warden's leave. Read it at your leisure, only do read it quickly, for the hour is late and my lord is tired." He laid the sheet on the ledge beside the day-book, and he stepped back with the small, satisfied air of a man who has just laid down the card that ends the game, and Lord Cassius, behind him, allowed himself the beginning of a smile. I looked at the sheet and my heart sank because it looked right. I was 17 and I had been at the gate 4 months, and to my eye it looked exactly like the tokens I had seen Mistress Ilda write, the same heavy cream paper, the same round red seal with the crossed keys and the wheel of the rolls pressed into it, the same careful hand. It said what such tokens say. It named Lord Cassius as bearer. It granted him leave to enter the record halls this night for the purpose of consulting the inventory of the estate of the late Queen Isolde. It carried the date. It carried at the bottom, in the strong slanted writing I knew, the name of the Warden of the Rolls. If Sergeant Fenn had opened the gate on the strength of that sheet, I would not have blamed him. I do not think any of us would have blamed him. It looked to every one of us standing there like the very thing that unlocks the door. Sergeant Fenn did not touch it. That was the thing I noticed, and the thing I have never forgotten. He did not snatch it up in relief, glad of a way out of the standoff. He did not bend over it eagerly. He looked at it where it lay from where he stood, and then he looked up at Osric, and then at Lord Cassius, and then back down at the sheet, and his face was as unreadable as the stone of the arch, and he let the silence come back and sit, and this time the silence was different. This time the silence had a question in it, and the two men on the other side of the gate began, very slightly, to feel the question, and I saw Osric's oiled smoothness catch, just for an instant, like a wheel finding a stone. "May I?" Sergeant Fenn said at last, and he stepped to the ledge, and he took up the sheet in his two still hands, and he held it near the lamp, and he read it. He read it a long time, far longer than the words on it needed. He read it the way a man reads a thing he already suspects, looking not for what it says but for what it is trying to make him believe. And while he read, I watched Lord Cassius's smile thin, and I watched Osric's fingers find the edge of his own coat and worry it, and I understood that the two of them had expected the reading to take a moment and to end in the swing of the gate, and instead it was taking a long, slow while and ending in nothing, and the not ending was frightening them in a way the argument never had. "It is a good hand," Sergeant Fenn said finally without looking up. "A very good hand. Whoever wrote this studied the Warden's writing with care. The slant is right. The way she crosses her letters is right." He turned the sheet toward the light and tilted it. "The seal is well pressed. The keys and the wheel are clear. A good seal." He set the sheet down on the ledge gently, and now he did look up, and he looked at Osric, and he said, "Where did you get the wax?" The question landed in the colonnade like a stone dropped in a still pool. Osric blinked. "I beg your pardon." "Wax," Sergeant Fenn said. "The Warden of the Rolls does not seal with common wax. She seals with the Roll's own wax, which is kept locked in her chamber and mixed to her own receipt, with a red that has a brown under it, near to the color of old blood, because 100 years ago a warden was cheated by a forger with a brighter red, and every warden since has used the darker one and guarded the receipt. This seal," he touched it once with one gloved finger, "is a bright red, a handsome red. A shop's red. It is not the Roll's red. Whoever gave you this token had the Warden's hand and the Warden's die, or a good copy of her die, but they did not have the Warden's wax, because the Warden's wax does not leave the Warden's chamber. So," he straightened, "this is not the Warden's leave. This is a forgery, a skilled one, my lord, and an expensive one, and I would very much like to know who made it, but it is a forgery, and it does not open this gate." I have relived that moment more times than I can count, and each time the same thing strikes me, the ordinariness of his voice. He did not accuse. He did not raise a hand or his tone. He laid the fact on the ledge beside the false token the way you would lay a true coin beside a counterfeit, so that any fool could see the difference, and he let the fact do the work, and the fact was pitiless in a way that no shouting could ever be. Because you cannot argue with wax. You can bluster at a man's opinion. You cannot bluster at the color of a seal. Lord Cassius's face had gone through several weathers while Sergeant Fenn spoke, and it came to rest at last on a white and rigid fury, the fury of a man caught who has never once been caught before and does not have, anywhere in himself, the practice of it. "This is an outrage," he said, and his voice shook. You dare to call me a forger, me, on the strength of the color of some wax. I'll have your tongue for it." "Osric, we're leaving. And you, Sergeant, you have made the mistake of your small life tonight. My mother will hear of this before the sun is up, and there will not be a gate in this kingdom low enough for you to guard when she is done." "You may leave whenever you wish, my lord," Sergeant Fenn said. "The colonnade is not closed, only the gate, but the token stays." Lord Cassius had already half-turned. He turned back. "The what?" "The token," Sergeant Fenn said. "The forged leave, it stays. It is evidence of a crime against the rolls, and the crime was attempted at my gate, and I am bound to secure it and enter it in the book. You may go. Your steward may go. Your man and your fine case may go. The forgery stays here with me until the warden herself sees it in the morning and decides what is to be done." Corwin. He did not look at me. He did not need to. He knew where I stood. "The book. Enter the hour. Enter that a person calling himself Lord Cassius presented at this gate a token bearing a forged seal of the rolls, and that the token was secured and that leave was refused." And it was in that moment, with my hand shaking on the pen and Lord Cassius white with rage, and the false token lying on the ledge like a dead thing, that I understood I was not watching a quarrel about a door. I was watching the opening move of something much larger, and Sergeant Fenn, who had seemed to be only a stubborn man guarding a room of dusty paper, had in fact just reached into the dark and closed his hand around the loose end of a plot, and was not going to let go, whatever it cost him. The forgery was not the crime. The forgery was the door to the crime. And behind it, in the dark record halls where the seals of a dead queen's estate lay broken on the tables, something was waiting to be found, and Lord Cassius had come at midnight to make sure it never would be. He did not know yet that he had failed. He thought he was retreating in fury to fetch a bigger weapon. He did not understand that the bigger weapon he meant to fetch, his mother's name, her reach, her cold displeasure, was the very thing that would, in the end, pull the whole scheme down on his own head. But that is running ahead. Let me tell you what happened when he left the gate, because what he did next was the second mistake, and the second mistake was worse than the first. He did not leave quietly. Men like Lord Cassius do not know how to leave quietly, because to leave quietly is to admit that the room went on existing after you turned your back, and that is a truth they cannot afford. So he left loudly. He gathered his steward and his big slow servant and his fine empty case with a great show of gathering, and he swept back up the colonnade with his heels ringing, and at the outer door he turned, framed in the arch with the lamplight on his wine-red coat, and he delivered a speech. "You'll remember this night, all four of you," he said, and his eyes went along us, Sergeant Fenn under the arch, then Breger, then Pell, then me at the ledge with the pen still in my hand. "You especially, boy," he said to me, and the word had a sneer folded into it. "You're young. You've a whole life to guard doors in. Ask yourself whether you want to spend it in a marsh fort at the edge of the world because you stood by and let an old fool insult the son of the queen consort. Ask yourself who's going to be here in a year, him or me. Then decide whose name you write in your little book." He let that sit, pleased with it. Then he found Sergeant Fenn again, and his voice dropped, and it was quieter and therefore worse. "As for you, you think you've been clever. You think your wax and your law make you safe. They don't. I know what's in those halls, Sergeant, and I know what it's worth. And I know a great deal more than a records clerk and a broken-down border guard about how this kingdom actually works. Before this is over, you'll wish you'd opened the door. You'll wish it more than you've ever wished for anything." And he swept out, and the outer door banged, and the boots went away up the corridor beyond, and the colonnade was ours again, and the false token lay on the ledge in the lamplight, and none of us said anything for a while. It was Breger who broke it, with a low whistle and a shake of his head. "That," he said, "is a man who is going to fetch a storm." "He is," Sergeant Fenn agreed. He had not moved from his post. He was looking still at the false token, though I do not think he was seeing it any more. I think he was seeing the shape of the night to come. And we will stand in the storm, and we will not be moved, because that is what the gate is for. Corwin. Is it entered? Entered, Sergeant. My hand was still not quite steady, but the line was straight. I had made it straight on purpose, the way I had seen him do it. Read it back to me. I read it back. The hour. The presentation of a token bearing a forged seal of the rolls by a person calling himself Lord Cassius. The securing of the token. The refusal of leave. He listened with his head slightly bent, and when I finished he nodded once. Now the second entry, he said. For I will not have it said later that I acted from anger or from spite against the queen consort's son. Write it plain. Write that the guard offered the bearer every courtesy, that the guard examined the token with care and found it false only upon its wax, that the guard refused leave not to any person but to a forged instrument, and that the guard secured the instrument as evidence and no more. Write that the gate remains as it was before he came, and as it will be after, open only to the lawful leave of the Warden of the Rolls, for the son of the queen consort exactly as for the poorest clerk in the kingdom. He paused. You have that? I have it, Sergeant. Good. He looked up the empty colonnade where the boots had gone, because the storm he fetches will not be about a door. He is too clever for that. He knows a door is a small thing, and the warden's closure was lawful, and no one will thrash a guard for keeping a lawful gate. No, he will change the story. By morning it will not be that he tried to force a closed gate with a forged token. By morning it will be that a rude and insolent guard humiliated a great lord over nothing, out of spite, out of some old grudge, and manhandled him, and called him a criminal before his own servants, and mark me, laid hands on the case, damaged some paper of value, invented a forgery to cover his own conduct. That is the storm. Not the truth of the night, but a better-dressed lie about it, carried by a mother who loves her son and does not look too hard at what she loves. And the only thing that stands against a well-dressed lie, he touched the daybook with one gloved finger, is a plain, true record, written while the truth is still warm, by a witness who was not afraid. That is why the book matters, Corwin. Not because anyone reads it on a quiet night, because on a loud night it is the one voice in the room that cannot be shouted down. I did not sleep that night. I sat by the daybook with the false token in its place, and I watched the lamps burn down, and I thought about what he had said, about the plain, true record being the one voice that cannot be shouted down, and I thought about Lord Cassius's promise that in a year one of them would be gone from that gate. I was 17, and I wanted, with the whole of my green heart, to be brave the way Sergeant Fenn was brave. But I will tell you honestly that I was also afraid, because I had heard the reach in Lord Cassius's voice, the sound of a man who truly could send a guard to a marsh fort at the edge of the world with a word to his mother, and I did not want to go to a marsh fort. And I sat with the fear all night, and by morning I had not conquered it, but I had done the next best thing, which is to decide that whatever I felt, my line in the book would stay straight. That is most of what courage is, I have come to think, not the absence of the fear, the straightness of the line despite it. Morning came gray and slow, the way autumn mornings do, and with the morning came Mistress Ilda, up early to her seals, and Sergeant Fenn met her at the record hall door and put the false token into her hands and told her, plainly and without decoration, everything that had happened in the night. I watched her face while she listened. She was old and she was careful, and she had kept the rolls through the reigns of hard men and harder times, and she did not gasp or exclaim. She simply grew very still, in a way that reminded me of Sergeant Fenn himself, and she turned the false token in her thin hands and held it to the window light and looked at the seal, and I saw her find the wax, the bright shop red where the dark rolls red should have been, and I saw her nod once slowly, the way a physician nods when a bad diagnosis is confirmed. You did right, Sergeant, she said at last. You did more than right. You saw what a younger man would not have seen, and you kept your gate, and you kept my rolls, and you did it courteously, which is the part that will save us both when the shouting starts. She lowered the token. Because the shouting will start, you know that. I know it, mistress. They want it in tonight, she said, half to herself. Because tonight the Isolde seals are broken on my tables and the inventory is open, and a man with a knife in an hour could cut a page from a ledger, or slip a false page in, and no one would ever be able to prove the estate was robbed, because the record of what it held would be the very thing that was changed. That is what a records forger buys. Not jewels. The truth about the jewels. She looked at Sergeant Finn with something close to grief in her old face. Do you understand what you stopped, Sergeant? You did not stop a theft. You stopped a lie about a theft, which is 1,000 times worse, because a stolen jewel can be found and returned, but a corrupted record poisons every claim that leans on it for 100 years. My whole life's work is that these books tell the truth. You kept them telling it. I will not forget it. It was the gate, mistress, Sergeant Finn said. Only the gate. But it was not only the gate, and both of them knew it, and I, standing there with the gray morning coming through the high windows, knew it too. It was never only the gate. The gate was the shape the thing took. What it was, underneath, was a man who had decided a long time ago that there were doors that stayed shut no matter whose hand pushed them, and had built his whole self around being the kind of man who could stand in front of such a door and not move, and who had that night been asked to prove it, and had proven it, and would be asked to prove it again, harder, before the sun had crossed the sky. The storm came at midday, and it came exactly as Sergeant Finn had said it would. We heard it before we saw it again, but this time it was not the loose, careless boots of one entitled man. It was the disciplined tramp of many, and the ring of steel, and a herald's voice going ahead of it calling the way clear, and I knew in the pit of me that the queen consort was coming to the gate herself. It is one thing to hear a lord threaten his mother's name in the dark. It is another thing entirely to see the name arrive, wearing a cold and beautiful face and a train of household guards, and to know that it has come to break you. The queen consort was a handsome woman of middle years who wore her rank the way some people wear expensive scent. Not something she carried, but something she gave off, that filled a corridor before she entered it and lingered after she left. She came down the colonnade in gray and silver with her son at her side, and behind them came 6 of her household men, and behind them, hurried in gray and clutching a satchel, came a court secretary I did not know, and behind him, worst of all, came a small quiet man in the black of a court advocate, the kind of man who does not shout because he has other people to do his shouting. Lord Cassius had fetched his storm, and the storm had teeth. Sergeant Finn stood his post. He did not stiffen or straighten. He was already always at the pitch of readiness that other men have to reach for, and so there was nothing for the arrival to make him do. He simply stood under the arch in front of the gate, exactly where he had stood all night, and he let them come to him. There, said Lord Cassius, pointing, and his voice had a new confidence in it, the confidence of a boy who has run to his mother and been believed. That's the man, mother. That's the one. The queen consort stopped a few paces from the gate and looked at Sergeant Finn the way a woman looks at a stain someone has told her about, searching for it, faintly disgusted in advance. You, she said, you are the guard who insulted my son last night. I am the guard who held this gate last night, your grace, Sergeant Finn said, by the warden's order. That is not what I asked. Her voice was very smooth and very cold, and it did not rise, and that was how you knew she was truly angry. She had learned long ago that a quiet threat frightens more than a loud one. My son came to this gate on lawful business, and you refused him and mocked him and accused a lord of the realm before his own servants of forgery. You laid hands on his property. You have kept unlawfully a document that belongs to him, and you have set down in your little book a slander against his name that will follow him unless it is struck out this very hour. That is what you have done. Now, before I decide what is to become of you, you will do 3 things. You will return my son's document. You will strike the slander from your book, and you will beg his pardon on your knees here before all of us. Do those 3 things and I may let you keep the rank you are so plainly unfit for. Refuse any one of them and by nightfall you will be guarding a fence post in a marsh. And this boy," her cold eyes swept to me, and I felt them like frost, "and these old men with you, unless they are wiser than you are." I want to tell you that I was brave in that moment. I was not. I was 17 and the queen consort of Eldermore had just looked at me and named my whole future as a thing she could snap in her fingers, and I was afraid all the way down to my boots. But I remembered the straight line in the book, and I remembered that whatever I felt, the line stayed straight, and I held onto that the way a man in a current holds onto a rope. "Sergeant Finn, let the silence come one more time." And then he did the thing that I have carried with me all my life, the thing that made the difference between a stubborn man and a great one. He did not defy her. Defiance is easy. Defiance is just another kind of shouting, and it would have handed her exactly the villain she had come to find. Instead, he answered her with such perfect, level, unarguable courtesy that there was nothing in it for her anger to catch on, and every word he spoke was a fact. And the facts were on his side, and slowly, in front of everyone, the facts began to turn the room. "Your Grace," he said, "I will answer you plainly, and I will answer you with respect, because you are the king's wife and this is the king's house. But I will answer you with the truth, because the truth is the only thing I have to offer that is worth anything, and you would not thank me in a year for a lie today. I did not insult your son. I refused him leave to pass a gate that the Warden of the Rolls had ordered closed to every person in the realm last night, myself included. That refusal was lawful. Had I opened the gate on his name, I would have broken the Warden's order and the charter of the Rolls and my own oath, and I would deserve the marsh you speak of. I did not break them. I kept them. That is not insolence, your Grace. That is my whole duty done. I did not lay hands on your son or his property. I secured a document. I secured it because it was a forgery, and it was presented at my gate as the Warden's own leave, and a forged instrument of the Rolls is not property, your Grace. It is evidence of a crime, and a guard who finds such a thing at his post is bound by law to secure it and to report it. I did that, and no more, and there are 3 witnesses at this gate who will say I touched nothing else. I did not accuse your son of anything. I stated a fact about a piece of wax. The seal on that document is a bright red, a common wax, and the Warden of the Rolls seals only in her own dark wax, which never leaves her chamber. I did not decide who forged it. I do not know who forged it. I said only that it was forged because it was, and the Warden herself examined it this morning and found the same. If your Grace believes the document is genuine, there is a simple remedy, and I beg you to use it. Send for the Warden of the Rolls here now, and let her look at the seal in front of us all. If she says it is her wax, I will strike every word from my book with my own hand and beg your son's pardon on my knees as you ask, and gladly, for I will have wronged him. But if she says it is not her wax, then, your Grace, I ask you to consider what it means that your son came to a closed gate at midnight carrying a forged leave to enter a dead queen's inventory, and to ask yourself, before you break an old guard for keeping his oath, whose name it is that the truth is really protecting. I have never, before or since, heard a colonnade go so quiet. The queen consort did not move. But something had happened to her face while he spoke, not a softening. She was not a woman who softened, but a kind of arrest, the stillness of a person who has been walking confidently down a corridor, and has just felt, under one foot, the floorboard that is not nailed down. She had come to break a rude guard. She had not come to answer a plain, courteous witness challenge to send for the Warden and let the wax decide. And the black-clad advocate at her shoulder had gone very still too, and I saw him lean and murmur something at her ear, low and quick, and I saw her listen, and I saw, because I was watching her the way you watch a fire you are afraid of, the exact moment the calculation changed behind her eyes. Because here was the trap Sergeant Finn had built, without ever raising his voice. He had offered her the one thing she could not accept. If she sent for the warden, the wax would damn her son in front of her own household. If she refused to send for the warden, then every man and woman in that colonnade would understand why, would understand that she did not send for the warden because she was afraid of what the warden would say. And a queen consort who is afraid of the truth in front of her own guards is a queen consort who has already lost, whatever she does next. He had not defied her. He had simply held up a mirror and let her look at what breaking him would cost her. And she was far too clever a woman not to see it. What she did next told me everything about her, and it is the reason I have never quite been able to hate her, though heaven knows she gave me reason. She did not send for the warden, but she did not break the guard either. She chose, instead, the coward's middle path that clever, cruel people always find when the two brave paths are both closed to them. She retreated, and she called the retreat a decision, and she took her son with her before he could make it worse. "I see," she said, and her voice was colder than ever, but it had changed key. There was calculation in it now, and calculation is a quieter animal than rage. "You are a very careful man, Sergeant. You have an answer for everything." She let her eyes travel over him once more, slowly, filing him away for later, and I understood that this was not a woman who forgave being outmaneuvered. It was a woman who remembered it. "I withdraw my son's request. There is no need to trouble the warden. My son will consult the inventory through the proper channels in the daylight with the proper leave, and this whole ugly business will be forgotten. As for you, no, I will not break you today. Breaking a man over a gate he kept lawfully would be beneath me, and my enemies would make a martyr of you, and I do not make martyrs." She smiled, and the smile did not reach anywhere near her eyes. "I merely note you. Come, Cassius." "Mother," Lord Cassius began, and there was outrage in it. He had brought her a villain and she was walking away from the punishment, and he could not fathom it. "Come," she said again, and there was iron under the silk now, a warning meant for him alone, and he heard it and swallowed whatever he had meant to say, and he went. But before he went he gave Sergeant Fenn one last look, and I saw in it a hatred that had gone past hot into cold, and I knew, as surely as I knew my own name, that Lord Cassius was not finished, and that whatever his mother had decided, he would try again on his own in the dark, without her wisdom to hold him back. She had the sense to retreat, he did not. And a fool with a grudge and no one wise enough to stop him is a more dangerous thing than any queen consort, because he does not know where the edge is. They swept away up the colonnade, the whole cold train of them, and the gate was ours again, and for a moment we all just breathed. Breger let out his long, low whistle. Pell wiped his palms on his coat and pretended he had not been afraid, and I looked at Sergeant Fenn and found that he was looking, not up the corridor where the danger had gone, but at me. "Your line stayed straight," he said. "It was not a question." "It stayed straight, Sergeant." "I know," he said. "I heard the pen." And that was all he said, and it was the highest praise I ever had from him, and I have valued it above every medal I was ever given after, because it was the first time a man I respected had looked at me and found me not wanting. Then he did a thing I did not expect. He turned to Mistress Ilda, who had come to the record hall door at the sound of the commotion and stood there with the ring of the rolls in her hand, and he said, "Mistress, I would ask a favor, and it is not a small one, and you may refuse it. The queen consort has withdrawn today. Her son has not, whatever she thinks. He will come again, at a worse hour, and next time he will not bring a forged token and a servant with a case. Next time he will bring men, or a knife, or a lie ready built, because he has learned that the honest way through this gate is closed to him. I would ask that you do not set the Isolde seals until we three at this gate have signed as witnesses to their state, and that a true copy of the inventory as it now stands be made and sealed and lodged apart, in a place he cannot reach, so that whatever he does to the originals, there is a second truth he cannot touch. If we do that tonight, then even if he wins his way in, he wins nothing, because the truth will already be somewhere he cannot follow. Mistress Ilda looked at him for a long moment. "You think ahead, Sergeant." "It is the only useful thing I do, mistress." "No," she said quietly. "It is not, but it is a rare thing and I will do as you ask." And she did. That afternoon, before the light failed, a true copy of the Isolde inventory was made in her own careful hand and checked line by line against the originals, and the 3 guardsmen, Fenn, Breger, Pell, signed as witnesses to its truth, and I, being under age, was allowed to sign as a 4th, a witness in training, which is a small thing that meant the world to me. And the true copy was sealed in the Warden's dark wax, the wax that does not leave her chamber, and it was carried by trusted hands to a place I did not know and was not told, and lodged there apart. And Mistress Ilda came back and set the seals on the originals and closed the inventory, and the tables in the record hall were clear, and the trap that Lord Cassius had meant to spring, the quiet corruption of a dead queen's record, was, though he did not yet know it, already broken. He just did not know it. And a man who does not know he has already lost is a man who will keep raising the stakes until he ruins himself, and that in the end is exactly what he did. For a few days nothing happened, and the nothing was the false dawn. I have learned since that the false dawn is the most dangerous part of any siege, because it tempts you to believe the thing is over when it is only gathering. The gate went back to its long quiet. The lamps burned, and Breger coughed, and Pell told me things he thought I did not know, and Sergeant Fenn stood his post as though the queen consort had never come, and the days went gray and cold and ordinary, and I began, heaven forgive my green heart, to believe that we had won, that the plain true record had held, that the queen consort's cold, I merely note you, had been the end of it, that Lord Cassius had gone off to sulk and would trouble us no more. I even said as much to Sergeant Fenn one evening, foolishly, the way the young say foolish, confident things. He heard me out, and he was quiet a while, and then he said, "Corwin, when a man like Lord Cassius is beaten in the light in front of witnesses by the truth, he does not decide he was wrong. He decides that the truth cheated him and that the light was the problem, and that next time he will do the thing in the dark where the truth cannot get at him. We have not won. We have only taught him to be careful, and a careful enemy is worse than a rash one because you cannot see him coming." He looked out up the dark colonnade. "Keep your line straight, boy, and keep your eyes open. The quiet is not the end of the storm. The quiet is the eye of it." He was right. He was always right. On the 6th night after the queen consort came to the gate, the eye passed, and the far wall of the storm arrived. And it arrived the way the worst things always do, not with trumpets and a train of household guards, but quietly in the small hours, wearing an honest face and carrying a lie so well built that for one terrible moment even Sergeant Fenn was not certain. It came as an order, a written order, sealed and proper, brought by a breathless page just past the turn of midnight, and it commanded in the king's own name, over what looked like the king's own seal, that the Warden's gate be opened at once, and the record halls made available to Lord Cassius and his agents, who came upon the king's business regarding the estate of the late Queen Isolde, and that the guards of the gate render them every assistance, on pain of dismissal for any man who hindered the king's express command. And behind the page, coming up the colonnade with the unhurried confidence of a man who holds a winning card, came Lord Cassius, and this time he had learned. This time there was no wine-red coat and no careless laughter. This time he came sober and grave in dark clothes, with 4 hard-faced men behind him who were not household guards but hired muscle, and the small black-clad advocate at his side, and the whole thing wrapped in the king's own name and the king's own seal. He had not forged the Warden this time. He had aimed higher. He had forged the king. "Sergeant," the page gasped, thrusting the sealed order forward, "an order, the king's own order, you're to open the gate at once." Sergeant Fenn took the order. He did not open the gate. He read the order the way he had read the token, slowly, near the lamp, and I watched the 4 hired men fan out a little in the colonnade, and I watched Lord Cassius watch Sergeant Fenn read, and I saw on his face the confidence of a man who believes he has finally found the one word no guard in the realm can refuse: the king's. "You will notice, Sergeant," Lord Cassius said, and his voice was smooth and grave and terrible with certainty, "that this is not a records clerk's leave. This is the command of the king himself. You told me that first night that you take your orders from the law and not from any person, however high. Well, there is no person higher. This is the king. Refuse this, and you refuse your sovereign, and no charter of the rolls and no wax of any color will save you from what follows. Open the gate." And here is the thing I must tell you honestly, because I was there and I saw it. For the space of one breath, Sergeant Fenn was not certain. I saw it. I do not think anyone else saw it, but I had watched that still face for months and I knew its stillnesses. And this one had a hairline crack of doubt in it. Because the seal on the order was good, better than the token. It was the king's seal, or a copy so fine that the difference could not be told by lamplight. And because a false warden's leave is one thing, but a false royal command is another. And if it were true, then refusing it would be treason, and Sergeant Fenn, who honored the king above all men, felt the weight of that possibility land on him like a stone. And then the crack closed, and he did the thing that saved us all, and it was not a brave thing or a defiant thing. It was a careful thing. "My lord," he said, folding the order and holding it, "I will not open the gate on this order, and I will tell you exactly why, and my reason is not the wax this time. My reason is the king himself. The king does not send his commands by a single breathless page at midnight. The king's express command to open a closed record hall would come by day, under the hand of his chamberlain, countersigned by the warden of the rolls, whose charter the king set above his own temper with his own hand, so that not even the king in a bad humor could raise the seals of a dead queen's estate on a whim. That is the law the king made. This order asks me to break the very law the king made to protect these rooms in the king's own name. Either the king has, tonight, secretly overturned the charter of his own rolls in the dark, by a single page, without his chamberlain and against his warden, which I do not believe, because he is a better king than that, or this order is false, as the token was false, and someone has forged the king's seal to do in the dark what he could not do in the light. And if the king's seal has been forged, my lord, then the man who presents it has committed the gravest crime in the realm, and I would be a poor guard indeed to open a gate on it." He looked up. "So, here is my remedy, and it is the same remedy I offered your mother, and it is the only honest one. We will wake the warden of the rolls, who sleeps 100 paces from here, and we will send a rider to the king's chamberlain, and we will hold this gate, all of us quietly, until the truth of this order can be confirmed by the two people who alone can confirm it. If the order is true, I will open the gate within the hour and beg your pardon on my knees, as your mother asked. If it is false, then you will have brought a forged royal command to the king's own gate, in front of witnesses, and I think, my lord, that you know already which of those it is, because you have gone pale. And an honest man carrying his king's true order does not go pale when a guard offers to confirm it." It was true, Lord Cassius had gone pale. And in that pallor was the whole confession, plain for every man in the colonnade to read. What happened next happened fast, and I have set it down in the daybook exactly, so I will tell it plain. Lord Cassius, seeing the honest way closed to him one final time, chose the dishonest one, and gave the 4 hired men a small sharp nod, and the 4 hired men moved toward the gate to take it by force. And Sergeant Fenn, who had been still for 6 nights, and had answered every provocation with nothing but the truth, moved at last, and it was the only time all through that long affair that I saw him move like the soldier the marches had made him, and it was over almost before it began. He did not draw a weapon. He stepped inside the reach of the first man and turned him, using the man's own rush, and set him against the stone with an arm bent up behind him, controlled and precise and without a wasted motion, and he said, in a voice that carried down the whole colonnade, "The gate is closed. Stand down, all of you, in the king's true name, or answer to the king for laying hands on his lawful guard." And Breger and Pell had stepped up beside him with their rifles level, old Breger's cough forgotten, and the sudden readiness of 3 disciplined men where the hired muscle had expected one tired guard broke the nerve of the other 3, and they stopped, and they looked at each other, and they did the sums, and they stepped back. Hired men fight for pay. They do not fight for a lord who has plainly led them into treason, and they had heard the words forged the king's seal as clearly as I had, and not one of them wished to hang for Lord Cassius's grudge. And that was the moment, the exact moment, with one hired man against the stone and 3 others backing away, and Lord Cassius white and shaking in the lamplight, that the far end of the colonnade filled with light and noise, because the rider had gone out the instant the false order arrived. Sergeant Fenn had sent Pell the moment he read the first line, before ever he spoke a word to Lord Cassius. He had decided in the first breath and only played out the rest to hold the man there. And the rider had reached the chamberlain, and the chamberlain had reached the king, and the king of Eldermore came down his own colonnade at the turn of the night in a plain robe with his gray hair uncombed and his face like a coming storm, and behind him came his chamberlain and his own guards, and gray and terrible and awake, the warden of the rolls with the ring on her chain. The king took one look at the scene, his guards holding the gate, the hired men frozen, his consort's son white against the stone, and he held out his hand, and the chamberlain put the false order into it, and the warden of the rolls looked at the seal over his shoulder, and she said in a voice like a closing door, "That is not the king's true seal, your majesty. It is a copy, a good copy. But the king's true seal has a flaw in the outer ring, a nick, that only 3 living people know of, and it is not on this. This is forged." And the king of Eldermore, who was slow to see his consort's schemes, but was not in the end a fool, looked at the forged command that carried his own name, and then he looked at the trembling man who had brought it to his gate, and then he looked for a long, long moment at Sergeant Aldous Fenn, who stood at his post with one hand still keeping a hired thug against the stone and the other empty at his side and his eyes forward, exactly as he had stood on the first night and every night since. And the king said, very quietly, "You refused an order under my own seal." "I did, your majesty," Sergeant Fenn said, "because I did not believe it was yours. Because you made a law to keep these rooms safe even from yourself, and I could not believe you had broken it in the dark. I would rather have hanged for that belief than have been the man who was right about the treason and opened the gate anyway." The king looked at him a moment longer, and then, and Breger swears to this day that he saw it, and so do I, the king of Eldermore inclined his head to his own guardsman, a small grave bow of the kind a king gives to very few men in his life, and he said, "Then you believed better of me than my own seal did. Would that I were served so well at every gate in my house." And he straightened, and his face went cold and hard again, and he turned it at last upon the son of his consort. "Cassius, you will explain to me now why my seal is forged, and why my name is on a false command, and why there are hired men at my warden's gate at midnight, or you will explain it to a court in the morning. Choose." He chose the court in the end, though not by courage, he chose it by collapse, because a man who has built his whole life on never being refused does not have, anywhere inside him, the tools to answer for a refusal, and Lord Cassius, cornered at last in the light he had tried so hard to escape, did the only thing left to a man like him. He blamed everyone but himself. He blamed the forger whom he named, which was more than he meant to do. He blamed the hired men. He blamed, God help him, his own mother, and that was the moment the last of my pity for him went out, because a man may be a fool and a schemer and still be forgiven something, but a man who hides behind his mother when the reckoning comes has nothing left in him worth the forgiving. The truth, when the court had it all, was smaller and uglier than any of us had guessed. Lord Cassius had run up debts, the kind of debts that clever idle men run up, gambling debts and worse, and he had meant to pay them out of the late Queen Isolde's estate, which was not his to touch, not a coin of it, for the charters left it all to the Crown Prince Rowan, her son, and to certain named charities and servants, and nothing whatever to the Queen Consort or her children. And so Lord Cassius had conceived his scheme, to get into the record halls and to alter the inventory, to add to it items that were gifts to him from the late Queen, phantom bequests, or to cut from it the true provisions, so that when the estate was finally settled, the corrupted record would let him bleed it. He had paid a forger for the false Warden's token first, and when that failed at Sergeant Fenn's gate, he had paid the same forger, at greater cost and greater risk, for a false royal command, and had told himself that surely no guard alive would refuse the king's own seal. He had been wrong. He had been wrong because he had never once, in his whole gilded life, met a man who could not be moved by a name, and had had the bad fortune at the one gate that mattered to meet the one man who could not. The forger was taken, the debts were exposed, and the late Queen Isolde's estate passed, whole and true and uncorrupted, to the Crown Prince Rowan and to the servants and charities the charters named, because the record of what it held had been kept honest by an old woman with dark wax and 3 guardsmen with straight lines in a book. The Queen Consort herself was never charged. She had been too careful, and there was no proof she had known, and perhaps, I have wondered, she truly had not, for even she had had the sense to retreat where her son had not. But the court knew, and the king knew, and though her rank protected her from the law, it did not protect her from the cold new distance in her husband's eyes, and that, I think, was a sentence of its own kind. As for Lord Cassius, he was stripped of his court offices and sent from the capital to a distant estate in the north, to live quietly on a small allowance under the eye of men who did not care for his name, and I am told he never again in his life gave an order that a servant had to obey twice, which is, when you think on it, a fitting end for a man whose whole crime was believing that a name was a key. He spent the rest of his days in a place where his name opened nothing at all. And Sergeant Fenn, Lord Cassius had sworn that first night that within a year one of them would be gone from the Warden's gate. He was right about that at least. Within the year, one of them was gone from the gate, but it was Cassius, gone north in disgrace, and it was Fenn who stayed exactly where he had always stood because the king would not hear of moving him. The king offered him promotion, in fact, a captaincy, a post at the great front doors where the trumpets sound, and the whole realm could see the man who had refused a forged command under the king's own seal. And Sergeant Fenn thanked him gravely and refused it, and asked to be left at the Warden's gate at the back of the east wing, down the colonnade that most of the court has never walked. "The front doors guard themselves, Your Majesty," he said. "Everyone is watching them. It is the quiet gates that no one is watching that need a man who will not move." And the king, who had learned something about his own guardsmen, let him have his way. He stood that gate for 11 more years, and I stood many of them at his side, for I did not go to any marsh fort. I grew up at the Warden's gate, under the best teacher a green boy ever had, and I hold that gate myself now, and I keep the day book, and I make the young ones recite the 3 sentences of the standing order on their first night exactly as he made me recite them. Every soul who crosses is named in the book. No soul crosses on a name alone. And the guard takes his authority from the charter and not from the person in front of him, however high. They ask me, the young ones, the same thing I asked him, even a lord. And I give them the same answer, because I have never found a better one, and because I earned the right to it standing at his shoulder on the night. A great name broke itself against a quiet man who would not move. Especially a lord, I tell them. A name is a loud thing, and the law is a quiet thing, and the whole art of this gate is remembering which of the two you serve. Serve the quiet one. It will be there long after the loud ones have gone north in the dark. Now light the lamps and keep your line straight, whatever you are feeling. The line staying straight is most of what we are. And they light the lamps, and I watch them, and sometimes in the long quiet of the small hours, I think I understand at last the coin I found on the road all those years ago and never spent. That a man's whole worth can come down to whether there is one door in the world he will not open for the wrong reasons, and that the guarding of such a door is the least glorious and most important work there is, and that it is done not by great men in the light but by quiet ones in the dark, over and over. Every time the price is named, straight line after straight line, until the book is full and the gate is kept and the truth, against every loud thing that came for it, is still standing where they left it.